Before we ask our next panel to come up, as I mentioned right before break, we're going to turn to the topic of untapped innovation capacity, and we're going to be led in a conversation by Dr. Judy Ginshaft, the president of the University of South Florida, and a great panel. We're going to kick off this panel similarly to the last one with a short video. I think it's a video that will, in some sense, tease up some of the major themes that we're going to be exploring in this session.
Let's look for a minute at the convergence of forces. From digitalization to the sensorial world, to the way in which 3D manufacturing, for example, is becoming a real thing. And then you place all of these forces into the globalized environment where money flows around the world. There is no more nation. The logistics process has been enhanced by a lot. And this has been impacting many organizations and businesses, especially the ones that are, intense in capital investment. So in many cases, in industries such as ours, every dollar you put in there is, ideally you can live with it for 20, 30 years. And the disruption that is about to be caused is significant. So this has led our company to redefine what innovation is. I believe if you look back, even the way the council was way back in time, when the quality movement played a significant role in everything, and the term quantum leap was invented, disruption today is far more greater than what we experienced in those years. So that is what has been driving the thinking for our company. We are very heavy into the energy business. So we're the largest tubular producer in North America. When our customers go down to look for oil beyond just fracking, if you go, for example, in the Gulf of Mexico, they are drilling under 6,000 feet of water. Then they get into the ground and they go 25,000 feet and they turn. And the environments that they encounter are incredibly diverse. We have to engage with them as we have to establish a relationship where they are comfortable sharing with us some of the new fronts that they are going at, so that then we can provide ideas before they commit to a certain approach. That level of collaboration requires much more scientific capability than what we've normally had that resided mostly on the physical, thermal, chemistry, metallurgical environment, way beyond that.
Well, as I think we heard from Mario just then, all of the innovation that he's referring to in his space really is underpinned by people. And so this next conversation is going to deal with that issue. We're lucky to have Dr. Ginshaft, the president and CEO of the University of South Florida, moderating the conversation. And in joining her in this panel, that's really going to explore the demographic, the socioeconomic, and the geographic landscape of innovation. We have Mr. Al Bunshaft, the president and CEO of Dassault Systems Government Solutions, Dr. Stephen Cross, the executive vice president of the Georgia Institute of Technology, Dr. Greg Heislop, the vice president and the general manager of Boeing Research and Technology of the Boeing Company, and Mr. Mark Lytle, the vice chancellor for economic development, the Board of Regents, the University System of Georgia. Please join us in these chairs. Thank you, Dr. Ginshaft.
Forced togetherness.
Well, good morning. Am I on? I'm on. I'm on. Good morning, and thank you all for being here. This is a great conference, and I'd like to open up this panel by just starting out with, as president of the University of South Florida, I've been there for 15 years, and it's, there's such an important issue in our nation now is how we grow our economy and have the inclusive opportunity and success for the next generation. University of South Florida is in the Tampa Bay area. I just want to talk to you just a little bit about innovation. When we were founded in 1956, the state of Florida was very sparse in population, very low in population. Most of the population was either in Miami or very far north in Tallahassee or Gainesville. So when we were founded in 1956, they said, okay, you will be the University of South Florida because that's going to be the university for all of the south of Florida. We're right in the middle of Florida. And then there was a man named Gorey. Ever hear of Gorey? Those of you from USF cannot. Ever hear of a man named Gorey? Yes. What did he do? Do you remember?
Invented refrigeration and air conditioning.
He invented air conditioning. The whole state popped with the population. The history of Florida changed. And now it's the third most populous state in the nation. So when you talk about innovation making a difference, that's what happens. So our name doesn't fit where we are anymore. We're not south of Florida, South Florida, but we're the University of South Florida. There are about 48,000 students and 3 campuses. But the main campus, the large 42,000 students are in Tampa. And we're a very, very diverse campus. We're a global campus, a research intensive, very heavily intensive. But in order to get ahead as a young campus, you have to be innovative. You have to have energy. You have to have some new life to you to make a name for yourself. So I see some of the people in the audience who have a National Academy of Inventors pin. And the National Academy of Inventors was established at the University of South Florida by our Senior Vice President for Research, Paul Sandberg, who is here. Thank you. And this innovation is critical. It's really critical for our nation. So for a state as diverse as Florida is now, the whole idea of inclusion is very, very important. In 1980, just 25% of the children across the United States were minorities. And today, the number stands at 46% of the children across the United States, and it's expected to grow to 57% by 2040. So the demographic shifts that we're seeing occur in our nation, it's really important that we are inclusive and we make sure that all of the opportunities are inclusive as well. So I just wanted to start out there and then say that I am really pleased with the panel that we have, because we are going to talk about untapped capacity, how we can grow, how we can make a difference for all students in our nation and working together. And I have to tell you also something. I think I have a new relative. My name is Genshaft, and Al's name is Bunshaft. We know that we're relatives.
Has to be.
Has to be. Has to be.
Highly likely.
But as was mentioned, he is CEO of DS Government Solutions, who is leading voice in STEM initiatives, was named one of 100 top CEO leaders in STEM in the United States. Also with us, Stephen Cross, Executive Vice President for Research, Georgia Institute of Technology, where the many accomplishments you've had and initiatives you've done are published widely, and you've done a lot in innovation and culture change. Dr. Greg Heislop, Vice President and General Manager of Boeing Research and Technology, and you have a team of 4,000 engineers, scientists, technicians, and technologists who collaborate with partners around the world. and Mark Lytle, Vice Chancellor for Economic Development for the Board of Regents, University System of Georgia, where you identify and enhance access to research and economic development assets in all 31 institutions in the University System of Georgia. Thank you all for being here. And let me start out and say, is the U.S. innovation ecosystem now characterized by exclusion? And what kinds of comments do you have? What do you think about it? What's your perspective? You know, you look at roughly 60% of college graduates are women, and Career Builders recently released a report showing non-white students make up 37% of all associate, bachelor's, and post-grad completers in 2013. That's up from 30% in 2004. So is it an issue of skills for preparation, or is there a need for a concerted effort to promote careers in innovation economy? What can we do to ensure that all of our workers have the skills necessary? I'll let any of you
I'll take a shot at it the first go round. To me, I don't think the innovation aspects are that drastically different than sort of the overall STEM picture and the kinds of students that we're trying to get into that. I think I don't know that it's necessarily exclusive as much as it's evolved to the situation where it is. I think we're not, a couple of the panelists in the previous panel mentioned trying to reach down much earlier into our K-12 systems. And I think it's really a matter of us inspiring people at an earlier age to take the right courses and work towards things. I mean, we can't expect someone to go into 11th grade that hasn't had math for 3 years and decide suddenly that they want to be an engineer, or that they're going to have the skills to go forward. So we need to work on collaborations between our industries and our educational institutions to do a greater job of inspiring people at a younger age to follow those disciplines and career paths, I think.
For us, we see it as a problem that you have to address at all levels, frankly. You know, like the prior panelists, we've got a significant university portfolio where we invest in R&D. I mean, one of the purposes of that is, besides getting tough problems solved, is you want to attract those students that you fund for their graduate degrees. We've got a list of universities that we go to. There's a shorter list of strategic universities, of which Georgia Tech is one. But we've also got on that shorter list of strategic universities 2 historically black colleges, just to make sure that we are always keeping an eye toward those students and attracting, have a good, strong, diverse pipeline. But going down into the grade school levels, where my office is in Huntsville, we've started internships with high school students where they can come out to our facilities and work over the summer. And even deeper into the pipeline are affiliations with numerous external technical groups, either geared toward the Hispanic population or BEA for African Americans. And we partner with them to try and attract students at even a much younger age. I spoke at a grade school in Houston a few weeks ago to 100 fifth graders, and it was the whole thing about, you know, first learning you could be a doctor without being a physician. But it was cool to see all these fifth graders just learning about aerospace, learning about other things they could do, what it means to be a doctor if you work in aerospace. But it's going to take all of us to do that, because that is, besides, and I agreed with Mark on the basic research funding from the government, I think it's going to take everybody in industry and academia to make sure that we are really attracting students at that very early age and working with their parents and their families so they know what path these kids want to pursue and how they'll have to be involved.
So it's an interesting question. Are innovation ecosystems characterized by exclusiveness? And just the answers so far, I would agree, probably not, but we should consider it a significant risk and ask ourselves how we prevent that, how we prevent our ecosystems from not amplifying inequalities that exist in the region. And to talk about what we're trying to do here in the Atlanta region, I have to tell a very quick story. We usually think about an innovation ecosystem as being related to some technology that we're trying to bring from the research lab to the market. But historically, we had a very interesting innovation ecosystem 50, 60 years ago here in Atlanta that really was innovation in social justice, in the civil rights movement. When we think about how that worked, how Atlanta was fairly peaceful during that turbulent time in the South, it goes back into the 30s where there are leaders like Martin Luther King Sr. and John Dobbs, and later on his grandson Maynard Jackson, and Mayor Hartsfield, and Ivan Allen Jr., who's very beloved here at Georgia Tech. These are people who, from business, from government, from social organizations, that came together to try to do something that was important for the region. And it was economic development, and it was jobs, as a basis for then eventual social change. Now, we get into the history of that, but what's important about that was leadership, innovation leadership that was focused on social responsibility, which promoted communication among people with very diverse points of view, and that connoted trust, and that trust led to alignment, and that alignment allowed positive change to take place in this region, and we still benefit from that legacy. So what I see going on now with Hala from the Chamber, and Mike from GRA, and Bud from Georgia Tech, people from different points of view, and company leaders, small companies, large companies, other NGOs are working together in alignment to try to make a marketplace where we can all be successful and we can include others in that. The outreach to the schools, and maybe I'll talk more about this as we get into this, incubation capabilities that we're trying to help our HBCUs enhance here locally, and trying to create more opportunities for everybody.
I would concur that I don't think our higher education system is exclusive by design, but I think we've created a situation where we have a far too narrow band of students who are qualified to enter that system. And I'm going to echo some of the comments made earlier. I like to talk about the challenge in terms of three parts: inspiration, education, and retention. And I think we have challenges in all three of those parts. In the area of retention, you know, I went to school in a system, and maybe you did, where in entry-level calculus and physics classes, the old look to your left, look to your right. You know, one or more of you, sometimes two out of the three of you aren't going to be here. That's not helpful. And that's the old way, I think, of thinking about education. We shouldn't think that our challenge is to weed people out. We should look at our challenge as how do we support people and keep people in. That's the retention problem, and that's at the higher ed level. It starts much, much earlier. And so I want to talk, as my other colleagues here have, about this K through 12 issue. We have a lot of higher ed people in the room, but the story I'll tell is I chaired the board of a high school that I still work with, actually a 6 through 12 school in the South Bronx of New York. So I'm from New York. My company and my office is based in the Boston area, and we created a school that graduated its first seniors last year. So we entered a 6th grade class, we moved them up, entered the next 6th grade class. And I've watched that happen. I've learned a lot from it. And one of the things I've learned is these students are not prepared. When they reach 6th grade, 7th grade, they're already off the track. They will not be, I'm sorry to say, the future innovators. And what are they lacking? They're lacking very basic skills: numeracy, literacy, values, that you take for granted because probably your children or you got them from your parents. Our world has changed, and the home that these children come from in our inner cities is very different than the homes that we came from, or the inner city might have been a generation or two ago. So I think one of our big challenges is how do we support these children in these challenged learning environments? How do we support their teachers? Because one of the lessons I learned is we had a great plan to create a school, and the teachers couldn't pull it off. They didn't have the skills. And how do we then inspire them? Because I do think, looking back on my own career, was the space program that got me and my father so excited about technology when I was a boy. And what are those role models that we're going to hold up for children today that are get them excited about these jobs? Because we are, your organizations are creating the future, and if you can get kids focused on that, I think they can be excited about it.
Good. Rachel, you had the first question that you'd like to ask.
So, being a young innovator that was asked here today, accompanied by Partha and Jasmine, we were asked to discuss a little bit about our background and then pose a relevant question supplementary to that. So, I am a super senior here at Georgia Tech in my 6th year. My parents are thrilled about that. But I am studying biomedical engineering and finance. And my entrepreneurial journey began when I placed with Jasmine and Partha in the Inventure Prize competition 2 years ago. I've gotten the chance to see both models of innovation that were covered in the primer, the linear traditional model when I worked for DuPont doing R&D commercialization, and then the new model, which is reflected in Georgia Tech's new initiatives in the curriculum space, such as Startup Lab and Startup Summer that Venture Lab teaches. From this, I went on to start 2 companies, highlighting the theme of the democratization of innovation today. We built the companies out of the GT student-run maker spaces here on campus, and we even crowdfunded ourselves on Kickstarter through product development costs. I now work with Georgia Tech's Venture Lab under Dr. Keith McGregor to see the other side of these curricular initiatives and as well the NSF I-Core program that was discussed earlier today. The largest challenge that I've had being a student entrepreneur is the lack of access to investment money, especially if you can't get out of the geographic area that you're in. Newsflash, as students, we are not really rich enough to travel all over the place. And this leads me to my question to the panel. In 2014, almost $500 million of venture capital investment was injected into 60 Atlanta deals, which was the most startup investment brought into the state in more than a decade. However, 75% of all venture capital money is invested in traditional innovation hubs such as the Valley, the Research Triangle, Boston, and the New York area. How do we encourage or incentivize the redistribution of this investment money to spur economic development in areas that are identified as non-traditional regions of innovation, especially those that correspond to areas of high minority growth?
Great question.
Yeah.
Great question. Panel. It's yours.
So I'll answer the question from a big company perspective, and I would encourage students like you that, you know, sometimes the big companies are a really good place to go try out really cool ideas too. But for us, well, I'll just talk about the team I run. When I took over a couple years ago, we were just too West Coast concentrated. And so we're embarked on a journey to get spread out. So we'll create 5 centers here in the United States, and we've got 6 globally, although the most of our population is here in the United States. So why did we move, you know, and we'll have a center in Huntsville, we'll have a center in Charleston, and we'll have a center in St. Louis. So we picked Boeing sites. Now, why did we do that? Well, I mean, for us, if you look at the Southeast in particular, with the entrance of aerospace companies, with the entrance of the automotive companies, there is a materials and manufacturing universe forming down here. And so that's where we're going to focus our efforts in those areas. You know, we've got collaborations with the automobile companies underway. We already had a strong relationship and a long relationship with Georgia Tech in flight sciences and in manufacturing. But now that's going to expand to the universities in Alabama, to, you know, universities in South Carolina, Oak Ridge National Labs, you know, so, and in the Mississippi schools. So there was and frankly, we saw it as a way to distinguish ourselves for talent, because, you know what, not every top student wants to live in Silicon Valley. They'd like to live someplace where they can actually afford a home. And so it creates a way to distinguish ourselves as well as attract the talent. So, and then, you know, once a big company does that, whether you headquarter a business or headquarter a research center, I always use a metaphor. It's like you put the magnet down and you see the iron filings kind of start to line up, because then the relationships happen with the universities, the relationships happen with the community colleges, the supplier relationships happen, and that ecosystem starts to form. So that's what attracted us to the Southeast.
I try to answer the question too, but also observed, I thought we had an unwritten rule that students weren't supposed to embarrass faculty. So I'll try not to embarrass myself. I've been at Georgia Tech for 12 years, and I'm going to have to answer the question from the trends that I've seen evolving over these 12 years. If I go back 12 years when I came, Tech Square didn't exist. We had kind of fragmented incubation, and I don't know if Keith would agree, but since he doesn't get a chance to ask a question until later, it's okay. But kind of our philosophy back then was, if we created a spin-out company, that was good. If that company was successful and was moved out of state, that was okay. And if it failed because it couldn't get investment or it couldn't get the mentoring that it needed, well, okay, at least we tried. Okay, and I've seen a real change over the 12 years. So you come in as a student who's created 2 companies, at least that I know of, and now what's changing is, even though we still talk about not having the presence of the venture capital here, we're able to bring in money from Mark Andreessen's venture capital firm or from Manhattan Associates in New York. So we're bringing venture capital into the area. And the big trend that was just mentioned by Greg is we also have Fortune 500 companies that are setting up a presence here on our campus, and they're investing in startup companies. And then probably the most exciting trend in the past year is we've had Georgia Tech students who have gone on to be phenomenal entrepreneurs sharing their wealth by creating venture funds basically for student-created companies, which is just a new development in the past year. So I've seen this integration of different kind of funding sources come together just really in the past 3 years that's really changing the situation. So and you saw just last summer in Startup Summer, for the first time, we actually brought the lean principles and the startup principles into the curriculum. So these are all positive changes that are happening. So what we need to do now is arrange for more capital to come in. But it's not just the financial capital, it's the social capital. And this is how we're going to get more people from the community in more disadvantaged situations if we can create the mentoring opportunities for them. One of the most exciting things I saw this past year in our Venture Prize, this is a competition we put on. It starts with about 300 student teams in the fall and went on down to 6. And folks over here were all featured on TV here in Georgia for the competition. It's much like a Shark Tank kind of episode. But we have a public school version of that we do, and we bring them in for a competition during the day as well. And watching 9-year-old girls present their business plans for their company this past year was just very exciting to see. So there's a lot of positive change that's taking place. I think it gets back to the leadership in the ecosystem has to keep pounding and pushing on that. We've got to do better than what we've done, but it's been a dramatic change in the 10 years or so that I've been around. And I'm old enough to think that that's a pretty fast period of time.
Yeah, let me add a little bit to what Steve said. I think that certainly the metro Atlanta area and much of our state, the reason we haven't focused as much perhaps on attracting the innovation dollars and those kind of things is because we have historically been very, very successful in the more traditional aspects of economic development, our ability to recruit companies and to bring them here and do a good job with that. I think sometimes it's a matter of need. I know that as our economy is shifting, I know that the focus of the Metro Atlanta Chamber is shifting somewhat. The marketing efforts that we're doing, it's really a matter of marketing and attracting the right kind of companies here to sort of set the tone, and it will flow. I think, to use Greg's analogy, lining the iron particles up with a magnet.
I would just comment that, first of all, I think you're right, that these hubs have advantages to them. And I saw that. I left IBM in 2010 and moved to a company headquartered in the Boston area and was truly impressed by the ecosystem there of universities, companies, venture money, et cetera, collaborating and working together. And of course, that's happening in New York as well. And in the last 5 years, it's happened extensively. And we're starting to see it happen here more. It's hard to succeed without that ecosystem, so I definitely think it's essential. As a company, we're a French headquartered company. We've been very much concentrated on the coasts, although we have 40 facilities across the U.S. We're in the Northeast primarily and on the West Coast. But in the last 2 years, we've taken an initiative to assign 5 different regional executives. We're looking at putting an office here in Atlanta to focus on the Southeast. It's in a region of tremendous economic growth, especially for the industries that we work with, most notably aerospace and automotive, although many others. And so there are new hubs emerging, and I would encourage the leaders here in this area to continue to foster that. We see it, those of us who aren't in this region, we see it happening, but clearly the ones you named are the leaders in our country. I'll also say the reason we did it as a company is we recognize that the United States, in spite of our challenges that we're talking about here, and I'm glad we're talking about them, we are the leader in innovation. 7 of our 12 brands are headquartered here in the United States, primarily through acquisition. We're 12,000 people, a third of them are here in the United States. So it's essential that we continue to invest in these hubs and that people like yourself leverage them.
Now, we often find that in the beginning of the creativity process and you've developed something that's perhaps patented, that's not where the money falls short. It falls short right in the middle phases when you really need that extra money to get the product into development that's over the hump, that's something, you know, they call that, for universities, they say there's a black hole between the discovery and the product. And so that middle phase is a real death knell phase for a lot of inventors or creators. And that's where that investment is critical in making it fly. Questions? Yes, sir.
My name is Suresh Sharma, and I'm one of the industry fellows for Georgia Research Alliance. One of the hard constraints that I see in my own entrepreneurial experiences to be able to untap the innovation capacity is lack of infrastructure. And even if, let's say, we were able to leverage capital, intellectual capital, creativity, and ideas, for any startup to be able to make a prototype, to make a hard product, to be able to use the ancillary industry infrastructure that used to exist at one time is no more there. So it is very hard. It takes a lot more time, a lot more money. And just like we have today a number of software technology parks that have come up, the lack of that hardware infrastructure is kind of a barrier to be able to untap into that innovation capacity that does exist in small towns, cities, and many other places. So would panel sort of share some of the thoughts that are happening in this area so that we can help unleash that much more potential? Thanks.
If I could, let me just share a couple of things we're doing at Georgia Tech, because I think it's a very important observation. The National Innovation Initiative from almost a decade ago talked about talent and investment and infrastructure being very critical. And if we look at some of the innovation ecosystem thrust areas here at Georgia Tech, certainly mobility and IT and financial transactions and cyber, we need really good access to bandwidth. That's the infrastructure we need. But another area that's really important is in biomedical devices and cell-based manufacturing. And any spin-out companies we create are going to need access to infrastructure. They're going to need access to expensive equipment. And this is where this leadership and this alignment in our ecosystem becomes very important. The Economic Development Agency of the Department of Commerce has invested in a capability we now call the Global Center for Medical Innovation. This is a nonprofit company affiliated with Georgia Tech that provides design services, access to GMP facilities to get devices ready for clinical trials. Okay, the EDA funding wasn't enough for that. The Georgia Research Alliance contributed money to help with that. And Georgia Tech contributed money for that. So we were able to create that infrastructure that helps fill that gap to go from the faculty members or somebody else's great idea to get the devices ready for clinical trials. And that's benefiting research coming out of Georgia Tech as well as Emory University and other research universities here. So that infrastructure, creating that is really key. The other part to get this out into the market, extension services that are required as well as part of the infrastructure. So we're lucky here in Georgia, we have a very good manufacturing extension partnership that works across the state. It's managed for the state by Georgia Tech, and we're able to tie that in with these infrastructure components we're building as well. But that was something we recognized before I started in this position, and several leaders in the community came together and said that was a need that we have to build that infrastructure. I think that's a real risk in the U.S. I just point to Seoul, Korea, where we think sometimes our bandwidth is pretty good. Their bandwidth is just so outstanding that now apps that are built in Korea, they have to dumb down to be able to have them used over here. And I think that's, so you're right on with the infrastructure concerns.
My name's Alan Tatel. I'm a local venture capitalist. I'm trying not to take any of this personally. I think I'm doing a good job so far. You know, one of the things that I think was brought up by Suresh and also the student is there are just certain sectors that are out of favor, and then there are certain sectors that are coming into favor from a venture capital perspective. I'd love to get the panel's perspective on 3D printing and what we need to do in this market to have the infrastructure to become a leader in 3D printing. You see areas like Chattanooga with their low-cost power making an effort, even places like Little Rock. Maybe we are a leader and I don't know about it, but I'd love to hear what we're doing in that area to capitalize on.
Well, for us, I mean, it all starts with what do you want to print? And out of what? Because that will lead to a whole bunch of other questions, obviously. I mean, it's real. It's going to be here. It is a tremendous way to, you know, we look at it as a tremendous way to reduce part count and you know, and as well as do obvious prototyping very early of some things. So you know, there's certain. But as I said, there's certain areas that it's just more difficult than others, and there's more research to be done. You know, certain metals, certain alloys are going to be, there's a lot more work to do in certain areas than in others. But in other areas, in other materials, it's much more mature. So you know, and I'm sure my counterparts from GE, Lockheed, and others would say the same thing. I mean, it's here and it's real and it's going to be here now. It's just a matter of what part do you want to print, what do you want to print it out of, how big a part do you want to print, and that's going to lead to other inventions and other engineering that has to happen. So.
And if I comment in other regulation, so there are places that you probably want to stay out of, unfortunately, but there's just so much regulation in anything that has the word bio or medical in it, where there's obviously room for a great deal of innovation, but it's just so hard to struggle in that pathway. So you see whole private equity companies just going for IT or just going for this because it's a much shorter route with less barriers.
I'll comment a little more. I mean, what some people may not realize, and you're more qualified probably to comment on this than me, but you may not realize that we're printing things today that are metal, not just plastic. We're printing carbon fiber. So the nature of the materials that we're able to produce parts, objects, everything from toys to advanced military parts, you know, we're learning how to do that with very low, comparatively low investment, low infrastructure. Our software is in the middle of these maker spaces. SolidWorks is probably the most used tool in maker spaces around the country. It's talking about infrastructure, and it's an incredible example of something that had huge barriers to entry, and suddenly high school kids are starting companies around this technology. So it has incredible promise. And I think in many areas we haven't even imagined. It is used heavily for fast, rapid prototyping, but it's also being used for production uses today. And of course, when you're producing things that are one-off, it's the most flexible technology we have. I think there's a lot of opportunities around catching up, though, in terms of the engineering and manufacturing disciplines, and we're playing catch up as well. We have a lot of sophisticated software and techniques and people in the field who know what it means to stamp a part or to mold a part, be it metal or plastic. But all new types of challenges are coming in when we start to layer parts, because that's what a 3D printer does, right? It layers up what it's ultimately building, and you can imagine all kinds of new engineering problems. So I think there's a lot of opportunity around this space, and we're kind of just at the beginning.
Just two comments real quick. I share the concerns about the bio area, but there's so much innovation that's going to happen outside the United States in that area that one of the things we've tried to do here in Georgia Tech is also include the regulatory issues that would, that would inhibit introducing a new product. So our School of Public Policy Economics are partners in all of this, and that's something we're working on in the context of 3D printing and cell-based manufacturing. The advances in metals with 3D printing has been very exciting because that'll be very important for the automotive and aerospace business in the Southeast. The other aspect is how this is changing supply chains. And we have a supply chain industry in the Southeast that's very important to us. And my faculty appointments in industrial engineering, and we think there a lot about logistics and supply chains and what the physical internet is, and how this whole notion of being able to keep your warehouse in the cloud and then being able to print parts and not be subject to delivery delays or things, or inventory stored up is changing how we think about the future of supply chains as well, and that's a very exciting area. So all of these innovations, I think we have to think about in kind of a system context. How has that changed the marketplace in a whole system for all the participants in the ecosystem?
Yes.
Mike Cassidy with the Georgia Research Alliance. In terms of untapping innovation capacity, there's another kind of infrastructure that I'd be curious, particularly Judy and Steve and Mark, maybe you would comment on. There's a lot of discussion today in higher ed circles about the role of innovation and entrepreneurship vis-a-vis promotion and tenure.
Yes.
And I'd like to hear a little discussion about how we get through that to really untap some of the capacity within higher ed.
This is where I'm glad sometimes we have a provost where this is his his job. But I mean, some universities I know have actually given promotion and tenure credit for creating a spin-out company. We haven't gone,
That's
which
exactly.
is great. Right? That we encourage this, and we include that in the promotion cases as well. Although it's not, faculty member won't get a sabbatical for doing this, but we're trying to do things to make it much easier for faculty to engage in entrepreneurial pursuit. One of the things we did 3 years ago is we introduced a mentoring program we call the Georgia Tech Integrated Program for Startups to try to make it easier to get intellectual property that's created by a faculty member into play. We've also, at Georgia Tech, we have to acknowledge the fact that it's not just the academic faculty, of which we have about 1,000, but we have another 1,500 research faculty that are part of this as well. And their promotion criteria actually reflects the fact that getting technology into use is very important. So this is changing, and I know it's a topic of conversation, our promotion and review tenure committees on how we're going to continue to reflect this as something that we want to encourage among our faculty.
Yes.
To me, Mike, I think it's a direction that we have to head. I think there's a balance, though, between what we've got in terms of ranking authorities and things that rank our universities, and the fact that so much of those rankings now is based on paper writing versus commercialization and those kind of things. So I think we need to work within that framework to get some changes there so that we're not damaging ourselves by going strictly down a commercialization path either. But I think we've got to have the right balance.
If I can make one quick comment before the question, thank you. Just to throw it out, if people are not familiar, and I'll show my hand in advance, I'm on the President's Council at the Olin College of Engineering, and we were there together with the Council on Competitiveness National Engineering Forum. They are attempting a completely new model there. There is no tenure, there are no departments, there are no research requirements. It's all about teaching undergraduate education, and I'll just stop by plugging a book called A Whole New Engineer, which David Goldberg and Mark Somerville, who's a professor there, wrote. And it's about this approach to interdisciplinary project-based learning through the entire curriculum. It's all about teaching. They teach entrepreneurship as part of the curriculum, and one of the founders of one of the companies we acquired, SolidWorks, is a professor there, so that's the genesis of our relationship. So it's a very interesting model, probably hard to repeat in a public school, probably hard to repeat today in a very large-scale traditional university. There 350 students, 45 faculty. So it's really a laboratory for education, but a very interesting one. If you're not familiar with it, you might want to look at it.
The other aspect of this is helping to maybe change the process a little bit is the encouragement and incentives we get from our federal sponsors. Innovation Corps has been mentioned several times. That's one where NSF will invest in the commercialization of the research results. We see a tremendous growth in this earlier Steve Case comments in private and public partnership opportunities, where universities are encouraged to partner with industry more and more to bring the technology to the forefront. And these are all things certainly we reflect in the PRT process with our faculty. So we're this is part of our strategy at Georgia Tech, and it's part of the encouragement we get from our sponsors as well.
We have one more question that.
Okay, sure. Just one quick comment and then a question. I've been fortunate to serve on the committee that makes recommendations to President Obama for people who win the National Medal of Technology. And each year we look at hundreds of applications. And the people who end up winning the National Medal of Technology have hundreds of patents. And these are university faculty. They do it very well. Clearly, they adapted it right into their process of being a great faculty member. I think they're role models, if you're looking for role models along this line, in the National Medal of Technology. It's just astounding to me how many of these folks not only have published, not only have been great teachers, but also have 200 patents. Right. And so there are role models out there of people who do it and who do it very well, and it's consistent to their problem. The question I would have, and I know the university presidents who are here probably have to deal with this, I know Mike Cassidy has to deal with it, and some others, and that is, and certainly Dr. Cordova has had to deal with it as well, is that a lot of our legislators come from rural areas. And when you talk about innovation, you talk about investing more money in research and development, or you talk about supporting innovation centers and so forth, rural legislators don't see themselves in this. They see this all going to urban areas, all going to places where research universities are, and there's no feedback to them. Now, I've always felt some of that is a little bit of inward thinking. I grew up in Coffee County, a small county in South Georgia. I was down speaking to the honor students there. They've done a tremendous job of improving their school system. And that's what I would say to any community. You've got to get in the game. You can't just expect it to happen. But what are your thoughts on how do you answer this question? We talked about exclusivity or inclusivity. Is there some way, a spin-off or computer printing where small communities can kind of get into the game here? Because right now they don't see themselves in the game, and young people see themselves deprived.
So I grew up in western Nebraska, a small town, and I'm on the board at the engineering college there. And, you know, one thing is very interesting is things like RFID for cattle, you know. You think of autonomy. You know, a number of times I got my dad to fly his Cessna and we'd go check cattle, and well, now you can have drones do that. I mean, there's a number of things, I think, in terms of just how you help agriculture that are from sensing, you know, obviously water management is a big deal, groundwater management. I mean, there's countless areas. I think you're going to start even see more, you know, as there's been this emphasis on this manufacturing initiative in the United States. You know, that's going to spill over to food production in terms of, you know, the food factories of the future, those type things. So I think there's going to be a wave of this, because the United States, if one thing we're going to always be, is we are going to feed the world. And so I think there will be a real push of technology even more, and I think it's more of an awareness issue to people in those rural communities of what this technology really means. Now, the fact that they see these wind farms sprouting up all over, so, you know, they know about renewable energy. You know, they know about groundwater management because that's something they live with every day. So whether it's, you know, just more information going out to those communities of what this could mean to them, just as a user, if not involved in the technology itself, I think is going to be very important.
Well, I know that we're going to have to wrap up, but let me just say that last month, USA Today reported that Google spent $115 million on diversity initiatives. I know that Intel set aside $300 million fund for diversity efforts over the next 5 years. Apple pledged $50 million to nonprofit organizations to get more people that are diverse involved in the whole world of innovation and you know, discovery. We just hope, and Dr. Cordova, you had said something about NSF putting money toward diversity issues as well. Let me end on this note. Are there any guidelines that you think any of these agencies should be setting up, or are there any recommendations that you would make so that the outcomes of this whole great, fabulous funding results in more diverse entrepreneurs and initiative, you know, innovators?
If I could, I'd just like to quickly observe something that I don't think gets a lot of credit, and that's what NSF does through their STC centers, the ERCs. There's always a STEM outreach, and then there's a peer review every year or every other year, and representatives of the universities get to participate in those, and I've never been one of those where there hasn't been an intense focus on diversity issues of people who are bringing into the research community, promoting in their research careers in the universities, but also STEM outreach to the rest of the community that those centers exist in, and I think that's very important. So I'd encourage the continuation of that.
For me, I think the notion of university industry cooperating around these things, or educators in industry would be better said, cooperating around these investments is essential. I'm a product, by the way, of the Industry University Cooperative Research NSF lab. I got dropped into one in graduate school, and it was an epiphany for me as a young student. We have to do that at every level of education. This notion of experiential learning opportunities for people to actually do something, for children to put their hands around something, to make it, to see the result, can be life-changing. And I think so the investments have to be partnerships is the key thing that I see.
Hands-on.
I would say, you know, in terms of the future competitiveness of the country, we have to do this, and it's got to be everybody. Because at some point, you know, it does become a numbers game, and just in terms of how many engineers are graduating and compared to other countries. So we have to be aware of that and make sure we are attracting more and more into STEM fields, because you know, we have to stay caught up just from a numbers standpoint, and that's going to take a lot of work from industry and educators.
I think it's going to come down to the consistency of the commitment at every level in terms of the educational side of it. In terms of the funding, it's very difficult to set up programs and have so much variation in the kinds of resources that you're able to implement year after year. And the end result of that is a lot of the senior people spend a lot of time chasing dollars for minimal effect.
Well, any ideas on this topic are most welcome. This is something that's, as I said in the opening, it's very important. We're going to almost have 50% of our population that's diverse Education is so critical. I want to thank the panelists and give you a round of applause. Thank you so much. And before Chad gets up here, everybody put their first finger up and your little finger. Go Bulls, USF Bulls. Thank you.
Thank you, President Genshaft, and thanks to panel.